Hello everybody, welcome back to Let's Read a Game of Thrones. And just to be clear off the bat, I'm not actually reading the book on camera or on voiceover, but we will be talking about this particular chapter and discussing the narrative. Without further ado, let's get into the Eddard Stark chapter of Let's Read a Game of Thrones. Alright, spoilers as fuck. You've been warned. You have been warned. Don't complain to me if you haven't read the books yet and you keep watching the video. But I do encourage you to go read the book, particularly this chapter that we're going to talk about, and then come back and watch the video. Alright, The Skinny. Let's Read a Game of Thrones. This is similar to a Let's Play, but I read the books off screen and do commentary and analyses on camera. This is the first Eddard chapter of George R. R. Martin's A Game of Thrones. So you can look down below in the description to find out more information about this chapter, about the book, and this video series. Eventually, I will start posting these PowerPoint presentations if you want to go through them. You know, maybe some kids might steal them and use it for their book reports. In this video, I will be giving you a plot synopsis or a summary, if you will, character overviews, themes, topics, symbols, and sometimes maybe even a little bit extra. Alright, so jumping into the Eddard synopsis. In my synopses, if you're new here, I like to give you the who, what, when, where, and why, and then also talk about some of the major plot points in the chapter. So the who in this chapter is Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon. And the what is after King Robert arrives in Winterfell, he immediately wants to visit the grave of his former betrothed, Lyanna Stark. When? I'm guessing that it's the mid-morning or day. It's the right after the king arrives, right? So he's not arriving at 1 p.m. or sorry, at 1 a.m. in the morning, you know, where it's dark and crickets are chirping. Where it happens in the Winterfell catacombs, but it starts right outside the gates of Winterfell where King Robert arrives, and it ends in the catacombs. And then why? Robert wants to pay respects to Lyanna Stark, wants to ask Ned to become Hand of the King. Jon Arryn, as we discussed in a previous video, was killed or died. We don't know that he was killed, but we know that he died, and we suspect foul play, or at least I suspect foul play. You might get a different interpretation from your reading of the chapter. So some major plot points. Robert arrives with his family. The families meet. We see the Starks and the Lannisters and the Baratheons all meet up. Robert and Ned go to the catacombs to see Lyanna, and then Robert asks Ned to marry him. Now, he's just asked him to give him a really big commitment. You know, he asks him to leave his home and live with them down in King's Landing and do all of the work. Robert is lazy as fuck. So what do we learn? We learn information about the Kingsguard because we see them on the page. We see that there is a Kingsguard. Obviously, you know, they protect the king. We don't know much more about them at this point. We learn about the position, the Hand of the King, which was the position that Jon Arryn held before he died or was murdered, whichever one you believe at this point. We don't have any affirmative information, but we know Lord Eddard Stark, I would name you the Hand of the King. That's where Robert is talking to Eddard, and he's asking him to become the Hand of the King. The Hand of the King was the second most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms. So we also see through this line that King Robert is not only giving him a lot of responsibility, but he's upping his level of power. And Ned already has a lot of power, being Warden of the North, Warden of Winterfell, if you will. So he already has a lot of power, so he's getting even more power. But he just has to leave, you know, his home and everything that he knows. What the king dreams, he said, the hand builds. And that also just sort of gives more about how the Hand of the King does more work than what the king does. But the king has all the ideas, he just doesn't get to execute them. We learn more about the Night's Watch. We know that Ned Stark's brother, Benjen Stark, from letters that he says, the Night's Watch is a shadow of what it once was. So we just get more information in tandem with what we know from the prologue about how they're dying. The wall has stood for 8,000 years. So we kind of get a little bit more of the lifespan of the wall. 8,000 years is a very long time. Now, I don't know if we know at this point that the wall is made out of ice, other than the fact that in the prologue that the wall was, quote, crying, but it is an ice wall. We learn about the Battle of the Trident, which is a very important historical battle where Robert killed the three-headed dragon symbol, Rhaegar Targaryen. Through that, we learn that that is the symbol of House Targaryen, is the three-headed dragon, the Hydra. I don't think they'll call it a Hydra, I can't remember, but it is a three-headed dragon, and this battle is important because it is basically when Robert killed the heir to the throne. Alright, next we're going to talk about some of the geography that we learned from this chapter. It's not necessarily the history or the religion, but the geography is very important, especially in a fantasy story where the world is pretty expansive. So we learn more about Winterfell. In the south, the way they talked about my 7 kingdoms, a man forgets that your part is as big as the other 6 combined. This is King Robert talking about the size of Winterfell. It's fucking huge. We learn of a place called the Neck. We don't know much more about it. It's kind of south, but there is reference to a place called the Neck. We learn that Winterfell and the area around it is filled with bogs, forests, fields, and if you add that to what we already know, it's a very cold place, and there's not very many people that live in Winterfell. It's the biggest, but it has the fewest amount of people, probably because it is such a harsh environment to live in, and they don't get much snow in the south, right? So it's completely different from what Robert is used to, and it's completely different from what Ned will be moving to should he choose to accept his duty and become Hand of the King. Right, but he can't really say no, right? And if you know anything about anything, this is his call to adventure if Ned is the hero. We learn some more about High Garden. There are fields of golden roses that stretch away as far as the eye can see. On page 41, sweet, juicy, explode in your mouth fruits, right? Which is so different from the barren cold of Winterfell. So just a little bit of contrast with these two places here. We don't really hear much about King's Landing yet, but that will come. So some character overviews. The focus of the character overviews for this chapter will be, of course, Eddard, who is our viewpoint character, and Robert. Alright, so let's jump right into the very first character, Eddard Stark, who is the viewpoint character of the chapter. Through the chapter, through his actions in the chapter, the way he engages with King Robert, we know that he is a man of honor, a man of action. We also learn that he is descendant from men older than Dragon Lords. So Brandon the Builder was before the Dragon Lords. We learn a little bit more about Brandon the Builder through this historical interaction with the deads in the catacomb, the dead in the catacombs. The winters are hard, Ned admitted, but the Starks will endure. We always have. So that just sort of talks about how the Starks live in such a harsh environment, but still manage to survive and endure, as Ned put it. He doesn't want to be Hand of the King, and that's a really big deal because he sort of has to. You know, his place as Warden of the North, he's Robert's good friend. If you're like me and you suspect foul play that Jon Arryn was murdered, then it'll be very important for Robert to have someone close, someone who he can trust, not only to get things done, but also someone whom he can trust to protect him if someone is in fact out to kill him. Because if someone killed the Hand of the King, they probably are going to want to kill the king. This was his place here in the North. You know, he doesn't want to go. Alright, so we've talked about Ned Stark, but before we talk about King Robert, some of the other characters that we get to know very well in the chapter are more about the Stark characters. We learn about Lord Rickard Stark, who is Ned's father. He is described as having a long, stern face, as Ned, sees him in the crypt, or he sees his burial mound in the crypt, or wherever he's buried. We learn more about Brandon Stark, probably named after Brandon the Builder. He's Ned's brother who died at the age of 20. He's Ned's older brother. He was ordered to be strangled by the Mad King Eddard Targaryen days before he was supposed to wed Catelyn Tully of Riverrun. Now, that is Ned's current wife. So not only does he have to fulfill the duties of his older brother because his older brother was killed, but he had to wed the woman whom his brother was, engaged to or intended to marry. So we don't know if Ned loved Catelyn at the time or if he was just doing it to fulfill a duty at this point. We just know that he did end up marrying Catelyn Tully, who is now Catelyn Stark. And we learned that Brandon was killed by or ordered to be killed by the Mad King. He was a true heir, the eldest son. He was born to rule. We learn a little bit more about Lyanna, who is Ned's sister, who was engaged to Robert, and Robert loved her. He loved the shit out of her. You can tell based on his interaction with his now wife, Cersei Lannister. She doesn't really want him to go to the crib, probably because she knows how much love he had for this woman, but he really wanted to go down and see her. We learn her last dying word was "promise me, Ned," and that will definitely come into play later in the series. When he gave her his word, the fear had gone out of his sister's eyes, and after that, she was dead. Robert looked off into the darkness for a moment, as melancholy as a Stark. So we just learned with this line that the Starks are very melancholy people. Ned later has a joke about how they just don't laugh. And this is kind of funny too. Robert is so unfunny that Ned even tells him about the Stark history. So we learn about how unfunny Robert is and how Ned's sense of humor is. They say it grows so cold up here in winter that a man's laughter freezes in his throat and chokes him to death, Ned said evenly. Perhaps that is why the Starks have so little humor. And he says this right after Robert tries to make a joke. So it just kind of comes across as, yeah, Rob, you're not funny. But, they have this sort of brotherly relationship, so they can get away with insulting the king in such a way, or just kind of saying this, self-deprecating. It could go either way, depending on how one reads it. And we also learn a little small fact. Sansa is 11. We've already heard about her, but we didn't know her age until now. So we know that Sansa is 11 years old. So next we're going to talk about the king himself, Robert Baratheon, the king in the north. What a wonderful name. He's not the king in the north, he's king in the south, or king of the seven kingdoms. But we know that he is the crowned stag, but he has a great antlered helmet. The stag is the sigil or symbol of his house, if you will. He was the Lord of Storm's End prior to his becoming king, and presumably we're going to learn more about Storm's End. We really get more actually backstory about the Lannisters and the Starks than we actually do the Baratheons at this point. But yeah, we will hopefully learn more about his family in the future. We know that he has fought a lot of battles. He has a spiked iron warhammer wielded with a giant's strength. Now, anyone who has a weapon that they are associated with probably uses that weapon a lot. So it's safe to assume that he used the weapon a lot, and that's why he got associated with it. So he's probably had a lot of fights. We also get more information that he is a great, victor. He was able to kill, first off, Rhaegar Targaryen. But also this line, in those days, the smell of leather and blood had clung to him like perfume. Leather was what he wore, and blood of the people who he slayed. So, he is, he's a fighter. We also know that since Ned has seen him last, I saw him last, he gained 8 stone. I love that line. I don't know why. It's just a very cool way to say that he got fat. He gained a lot of weight. For those of you folks out there who watch the show, I wonder what a skinny Robert Baratheon would have looked like, or maybe a stout Robert Baratheon. But he has beard as coarse and as black as iron wire. Now, that's a tough-ass beard. As iron wire? What? If my beard was made of iron wire, I would be ferocious. Sorry, I'm getting so tangential today, everybody. And we know more that he loved Ned's sister Lyanna, right? Ned loved him for that, for remembering her still after all these years. It's the first thing he wants to do when he gets there, as I said. And that is where that line came in, where Ned loved him, that he really wanted to go see and pay respects to the dead. I vowed to kill Rhaegar for what he did to her. So we know that he loved her, and he knows that he hated Rhaegar. In my dreams, I kill him every night, Robert admitted. 1,000 deaths will still be less than he deserves. He wants Ned to become the new hand of the king. So, that's sort of the inspiration behind his visit. It's gone so long that he really only came up here to ask him this question. He wants this to happen. Alright, so also in this chapter, we get a lot of information about the type of character Ned is versus the type of character Robb is. We see the two of them play each other since they're really the only two characters in the chapter after they go down to the catacombs. So Ned knelt in the snow to kiss the queen's ring, while Robert embraced Catelyn like a long-lost sister. Already we see that Ned sort of is honoring the queen, while Robert is, just like a long-lost family friend, or not lost, but a long-time family friend. He hugs her like, hug me, So that's different in their characters already. Ned is loyal, and Robert is clearly clearly unfaithful to his wife. And the girls, Ned, he exclaimed, his eyes sparkling. I swear, women lose all modesty in the heat, he says, joking around with Ned. He really likes him a good woman, or a bad woman, if you will. Ned is humble while Robert seeks pleasures. Robert Baratheon has always been a man of huge appetites, a man who knew how to make his pleasures, or how to take his pleasures, excuse me. That was not a charge anyone could lay at the door for Eddard Stark. So he's a stern character who doesn't really self-indulge, where Robert definitely self-indulges, even to the point of committing adultery, but we don't know if that's a crime. I mean, he's the king, he can do whatever the fuck he wants. Still contrast to Ned's character. We see that Robert complains about being king, whereas Ned embraces his duty to lead, even though he feels that his older brother should have been Warden of the North. So we see this on multiple ways. He doesn't want to be Hand of the King. He does his responsibility and his duty, even though it might not be what he wants to do, whereas Robert is so lazy that he'd rather get Ned to be Hand of the King, so he doesn't have to do anything. So he can just hunt, eat, and shit all day, and get Ned to do all of the work. So it kind of correlates on that. I swear to you, sitting on a throne is 1,000 times harder than winning one. Laws are a tedious business, and counting coppers is worse. And the people, there is no end of them. I sit on that damnable iron chair and listen to them complain until my mind is numb and my ass is raw. You know, he doesn't want to do the politicals. And the borough practice, we have crypt versus hills. We're in this dark, dank crypt, which reflects the sort of surroundings of Winterfell, whereas the hills are beautiful and open, you know, which reflects the south. So we also learn a little bit more about the Lannisters in this chapter. We learn that Cersei Lannister thinks the dead can wait, undoubtedly knows why Robert is going to see the dead, because he loved Lyanna, probably more than he loved her. We learn that Sir Jaime Lannister, Cersei's brother, has hair as bright as beaten gold. We'll talk more about him when, if he either gets a viewpoint or if, you know, he's a character that we learn more about later. He definitely will be. We learn about Tyrion Lannister, and we know that he is called the Imp. Now, I don't know if the chapter really details this, but he's a little person or midget, whatever the term is that is politically correct to say, but in the confines of Game of Thrones, he is a dwarf. Tywin Lannister is the sort of the patron of House Lannister. He resides at Castle Rock. He sort of leads it. Ned does not trust him, and it makes sense because he is a Lannister, and Ned does not trust the Lannisters. Some old wounds never truly heal and bleed again at the lightest word. Now, as a Scorpio, I have been told that I keep grudges, so I can relate to Ned. Alright, so some other characters who appeared or were mentioned. We see Sandor Clegane, who has a terrible burned face, and he's one of my favorite characters, so we'll learn more about him as the story goes on. We learn more about Balin Greyjoy, who is Theon's father. He led a rebellion 9 years ago, but was defeated by Ned and Robert, which is why Theon currently serves as Ned's ward. He's the self-proclaimed king of the Iron Islands prior to his defeat, and they sort of shut that down. Real quick, we learn more about Howland Reed, who is a Crannog man. We'll learn more about that, I presume. And he had taken her hand from his, and I actually forgot what that even referenced, because I took these notes a few days ago, but I believe it had to do with, oh no, never mind. Howland Reed was the character who was at the scene of Lyanna Stark's death, and he took her hands out of Ned's hands once she passed away. We learn more about Jon Arryn. I've never seen the man sicken so quickly, which, you know, hints that he was probably murdered. Looked fine one day and then was sick and dead the next. That doesn't happen a lot, but I guess during this sort of time period that the stories kind of reflect, and it could, someone could be perfect one day and then die the plague the next. And we know that his wife Lissa fled. He thinks foul play is afoot. We know that he was Lord of the Eyrie, was Warden of the East as Hand of the King. And this is a big deal because his son will succeed to the Eyrie, but will not be named Warden of the East until he comes of age. And that is maybe, and that's something that King Robert said. The Arryns have always been Wardens of the East. The title goes with the domain, but Robert is like, no, he's too young. Alright, so now we're going to talk about some themes, topics, and symbols. We get life and death again in this chapter. They're literally in catacombs, right? So we talk about Jon Arryn's death, but we also talk about Lyanna Stark's death. We see her we sort of learn more about her death through Ned's viewpoint and how he was there when she died. We see some service and sacrifice, where one sacrifice that the characters have to make is Ned and family will probably have to leave their home should they choose to go to King's Landing. So the characters have been our predominant focus, are forced to leave home. And why this is so crucial is that if any of those characters are the heroes, it's very important that a hero has to leave their home, be it a metaphorical home or a physical home. They need to be separated from that environment of safety and forced into an environment that will help the tension escalate and cause the character to be under the pressure, so that way they shape themselves, they grow, they learn, and they become different, potentially better or worse characters as a result. We get more about swords. If you haven't guessed by now, I love the shit out of some swords. So just a few lines about swords. By ancient custom, an iron longsword had been laid across the lap of each who had been Lord of Winterfell to keep the vengeful spirits in their crypts. He sat with quiet dignity, stone fingers holding tight to the sword across his lap. But in all life, all swords had failed him. You know, he was a terrible fighter. Whoever that character was, I can't remember, wrote this a few days ago. We get more about eyes, and all around them the dead of Winterfell seemed to watch with cold and disapproving eyes. He could feel the eyes of the dead. They were listening, he knew, and winter was coming. You know, again, dropping bars by Ned Stark with the house words, the House Stark words. We get more imagery of hot versus cold. The catacombs are a visual representation of the cold and that environment of death. And then we also get north versus south, where the north is a cold place and the south is a very warm and comfortable place. So thanks again, everybody. If you stuck around this long, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe on my videos. Your support is outlandishly appreciated. I really want my channel to grow. If you have suggestions for me, please drop those below in the comment section. You know, I'm on Facebook. You can find my page there. Like it, comment, chat with me. I'm also on Thrones Amino, which is a very cool app for Game of Thrones fans. So if you are a Game of Thrones fan, I encourage you to check out that app and interact with me there and other people who are really interested in Game of Thrones. Now, I don't want Game of Thrones to be my channel, but you know, it is where I'm going to start. I'm going to read other books, hopefully build an audience to the point where I can start taking suggestions for what you guys would like to see me read. So thanks again for watching. My name is Riakeem, and this has been Let's Read a Game of Thrones, the Eddard Stark Chapter 4. Insert exit song. One day I will have an exit song.